Hello everyone, this recording is going to focus on choosing your research approach. So as you come to write up your dissertation and you begin to write up your methodology, one of the first sections you need to complete is your research approach, and you need to indicate your decisions in a number of areas. Now, key decisions I've indicated on this screen here are in relation to whether it is an inductive, deductive or abductive study, and also whether it's qualitative or quantitative. Other things you might cover in this section relate to the research paradigm, but as I have said in an earlier recording, I discourage students from discussing that in their master's dissertations or undergraduate dissertations, unless they have been specifically guided to do that by their dissertation tutor. You can also talk about whether you're using primary or secondary data, particularly if you're going to be actually using a secondary data source. I don't want you to talk about your literature review here. Here you're talking about secondary data if you actually have access to a secondary data source that you're going to reanalyze. So this isn't about your literature reviews. Okay, so these are the two areas where you've got to really talk about in your research approach. So first of all, quick recap really about deductive studies. So if your literature review has identified a number of elements that might be related to a topic and has mapped out what these relationships might be, so perhaps you have actually found a theory or model which tells you that one factor, one variable has an impact on another variable, so there's something that specifies relationships between things. So maybe you found something that indicates there's a relationship between age and the way people use social media. Then that might make this a deductive study. So I've got examples there of can repeat event attendance be predicted by age. So if there's a study which shows that people in a certain age cohort will be the ones who come back to a particular event again and again, then you have got some evidence for that. Or it might be that the literature review has identified a personality trait which is predicted to increase FOMO. That FOMO is fear of missing out. So then you might have a deductive study. And what you might find as well is there could be research in a related area on your topic that has also specified variables of importance and the relationships between those variables. So you might find there is some really good theory that has been conducted in relation to consumer behaviour in a different area. So for example, a lot of tourism research can apply quite well in the events context. It also can apply very much in some of the sports contexts as well. So that might be able to translate over. And then again, your study is likely to be deductive. So basically, if you've got enough information to be able to hypothesize relationships and results, then you probably are going down a deductive route. On the other hand, inductive studies, this is typically where there isn't much literature directly related to the topic. So it's often when you're researching a new and emerging area. So for example, if you're looking at something to do with artificial intelligence, there's not actually that much written about that in the social sciences. There's quite a lot written in computer science, but nothing about it not so much about it in relation to human behaviour. So there might not be much literature on that. So is it a new or emerging area? Is it something that people haven't really considered before, something that's just started happening? So actually, of course, there could be quite a lot of interesting questions in relation to COVID-19 and what's happened, where actually we don't know much about this. Another thing that might make a study inductive is if there's a need to question the existing theory. So, the theory is quite old, it was developed in a different kind of context, things have changed. It could be that, you argue it's quite a gendered perspective. There's something like that makes you think, actually, you need to start from scratch here. So if there's little known about the topic, if there doesn't appear to be theory that you can use from other areas, then it's likely to be inductive, and you're unlikely to be able to hypothesize the results. Then finally, there's these abductive studies. So here you might have a lot of knowledge in one context, but not much knowledge in the context you are specifically researching. So for example, there could be quite a lot that's been undertaken in relation to leisure studies, but that theoretical knowledge has never been applied in tourism, sports or events, and it could well transfer over to that particular area. This could also make it a deductive study. The difference is quite subtle, because if enough's known and it's pretty clear it would apply, then it's probably going to be a deductive study. But if you're drawing on stuff which, doesn't perhaps have quite the same obvious direct link, it may be more likely to be abductive. And, here the theory, it's likely to lead to inform the data collection, and then the findings will actually lead to a modified theory in this sort of study. And then you've got this question about whether it's qualitative research or quantitative research. So, qualitative research is good at these things. So if you want to explore and describe things and processes, if you want to understand the way something is happening and the processes that are taking place, then qualitative research could be very useful there. If you need to understand things in depth, this is where qualitative research is very good. You want to find out about people's experiences in everyday life. Remember, the events, hospitality, sport, tourism, they're all very experiential. Things like exploring the meanings of things for participants. Here, qualitative research is very useful, and particularly if you think the meanings might be very different for different participants, we need to understand that better. Understanding processes. So I've given an example there of how to manage environmental impacts of events. So what is people are doing, how are they doing, why are they doing it in that way? And it's very good at asking open-ended questions when you want to explore things. Quantitative research, on the other hand, is very good at testing theory. It's good at producing factual data. It tends to do this in a numerical format. And, one of the things we can do well with quantitative research is look at the relationship between variables. If we think there's a relationship between age and sports participation in a particular sport, then quantitative research will help you find that out. It's very good at profiling participant characteristics, and it can be good at identifying differences. So, for instance, if you want to look at differences in behaviour based on age, then you can do a nice quantitative study where you measure the behaviour in some way and you ask people their age. And it can also be good for comparing motives for participating. So, for example, for attending different events. So, quantitative studies are quite good here. So they tend to be good where we can actually clearly measure something, we can identify particular variables, and we can make comparisons between those variables once they've been measured. What you will need to do in this your research process section is justify your decisions. So go and have a look at the textbooks recommended, because they will actually offer you explanations of all these things like inductive research, qualitative research, etc. And they will help you formulate a justification for your decisions. So you will get marks for stating it's inductive and explaining what an inductive study is, but that's just describing. All you've done there is just describe what inductive is and said that your study is inductive. Where you get the really good marks is if you explain why your study needs to be inductive in relation to that explanation that's come from the research methods books. So what you're trying to do here is justify your decision in relation to your topic. So it's a statement like, this topic requires an inductive study because. Then finally, a couple of frequently asked questions that I have. First one is, can my study be inductive and deductive? Well, not normally, no. But in that case, it might be abductive. But, again, they are all three of them different things. Typically, a study wouldn't be inductive and deductive at the same time, but abductive arguably goes some way between weaving the two together. Often you do inductive studies followed by a deductive study to test the theory, and sometimes you do inductive studies after deductive studies if you want to explore something in much more depth that's popped up from your deductive research. But generally they're not both. And then, can my study be qualitative and quantitative? Well, it can, and there's a session and a video on mixed methodology. But generally we would guide you against this, partly because there would be far too much work to do for a study that involved both qualitative research and quantitative research at a high standard in a dissertation. So I would generally tell students to do one part only and do that part well, and that way you will get much better marks. So go and do some reading around this, and remember that when you write up your research approach, you need to justify the decisions in relation to your topic and in relation to what it is you're trying to find out. And that way you move beyond the descriptive and you start doing some critical analysis.